Hello cruel world. Joanna DENNEHY committed a series of murders in Cambridgeshire in March 2015. She was diagnosed as a psychopath. How did DENNEHY kill her victims? What is a psychopath? What's the differences between male and female psychopaths? I'm going to answer all of these questions within this video, and I'm also going to give you some of my professional insights as a forensic psychiatrist. This channel is a Psych for Sore Minds, the only YouTube channel that I'm aware of that covers both true crime and mental illness, and is hosted by professional consultant forensic psychiatrist, me. My name's Dr. Sohom Das. I assess mentally disordered offenders for a living, so you don't have to. So Joanna DENNEHY went on this random killing spree in March 2015. She ended up killing 3 men, and she stabbed them. She dumped their bodies in ditches outside Peterborough in the UK. She also stabbed 2 other men who survived. And the whole story is very bizarre. So there was elements of humiliation. For example, DENNEHY dressed one of the victims up in this black sequins dress after she'd killed him before she dumped his corpse. Another victim that she took drinking drugs with, and she humiliated the men. So afterwards she would put them, as well as the dress I mentioned, afterwards she'd put them in positions with their bums up in the air. And after those killings, she was driven by an accomplice with a mildly amusing name, Gary Stretch, to a place called Hereford. And that's when she stabbed the other 2 men, and she seemed to have selected them at random. Both of them were dog walkers, and Joanne actually stole a dog as well, which is just not on. So if we look at DENNEHY's background, she was born in St Albans, and she grew up in the nearby place of Harpenden. For those who are not familiar outside of the UK, I know it quite well. It's not too far from where I'm based. And I have to say, it's a nice, posh place. Quick shout out to my mate Chips, who lives there. And DENNEHY reportedly had quite a normal upbringing, and she had doting parents. There were no kind of problems with her behaviour that were reported when she was a kid. And then at the age of 15, she dropped out of school, and then she ran away from home. By the age of 16, she refused to come home, and she started a relationship with a man who was much older than her. They had 2 daughters together. Apparently there's a lot of cannabis and drugs involved, and also it's alleged that DENNEHY was physically abusive towards this man. So I would say that so far her background's not typical for a psychopath, because often there's a history of abuse, which leads to the question, why is there abuse in the history of some psychopaths and not the others? And my answer to that would be that it depends on a lot of internal and external factors. So internal factors would be how that individual or that child processes the trauma, and it would be their own mental health, so things like anxiety, depression. And then external factors would be things like the rest of their social circle, social support, so whether they had other friends, whether they had other peers, or if not, were they kind of bullied, was the rest of their life harsh, I guess. Also, the other thing is, just because in this case of DENNEHY and in general, abuse is not reported, doesn't mean that it didn't happen. Because sometimes abuse is not reported. So I've certainly had many patients that I've rehabilitated who have suffered from lots of trauma, but they haven't told me or the other mental health workers initially, because for their perspective it's none of our business and they don't really want to disclose this personal information. And then further down the line, when you build a therapeutic relationship, they might disclose things. And the other thing is that abuse is not always obvious, especially if it's not physical or sexual abuse, if it's emotional abuse or neglect. So emotional abuse and neglect, it can be quite subtle, and for some people they might not even know that they're being abused, and it might be hard for them to distinguish what's just a bad relationship with their parents with a degree of hostility from actual abuse. So back to DENNEHY, she purposely targeted men. In fact, she told a psychiatrist later that murder was Moorish, just like Pringles or crack. And also she said to the psychiatrist that after the first killing she got a taste for it, which is quite chilling really. And then she also later said to Gary Stretch, the man that was driving her around, that she was doing this for the purpose of entertainment. And she said these very disturbing words to him: "I want my fun, I need you to get my fun." So the assessing psychiatrist diagnosed DENNEHY with psychopathy, antisocial personality disorder, and borderline personality disorder. Now, I've already done a series of a Psych for Sore Mind on psychopaths, including obviously explaining what a psychopath is. I've also told you about some real, true life case examples of people that I've assessed who've formerly been diagnosed. as psychopaths. I've even told you about working for a person who I believe was a psychopath. And in another bonus vid, I've carried out the psychopath test, known as the psychopathy checklist, on Michael Jordan to see if he would fit the criteria to be diagnosed as a psychopath. So I implore you to go and check out those vids. But if you can't be bothered, then very briefly, a personality disorder is ingrained. It's like your actual characteristics are flawed. Antisocial personality disorder is when people are impulsive, they lack empathy for other people, they don't really care about what's right and what's wrong, and they often obviously break the law and offend. So psychopathy can be thought of as all of that and more. So on top of all of that, psychopaths are very manipulative, and they kind of see everybody as an opportunity to exploit. So everybody is just a stepping stone for them to get what they want. So one of the problems I have with Dennehy's diagnosis is you can't really be both, because psychopathy supersedes antisocial personality disorder. But Dennehy was also diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, also known as emotionally unstable personality disorder. So as the name suggests, these people are very unstable, they can lose their temper, they have like mood swings, they're impulsive, they tend to have massive arguments and explosive relationships, and they often use drugs and self-harm. On top of all of that, Dennehy was also diagnosed with paraphilia sadomasochism, which is where you get this like sexual excitement which is derived from inflicting pain or humiliation. So that's things like bondage. So Dennehy was sentenced to life imprisonment, and she was ordered to never be released from prison. And she is just one of 3 women in the UK, in England in fact, who have all been given a whole life tariff. So a life sentence, contrary to popular belief, doesn't mean life in prison. It means that there's a minimum amount of time that the prisoner spends in prison, the tariff, and after that, for the rest of their lives, they're followed up in the community by probation services. Whereas a whole life tariff means that you spend your entire life behind bars, you'll never be released. So can you, dear viewers, guess who the other 2 women in the UK are who are on whole life tariffs currently? Should be fairly easy, I think, if you're an actual true crime fan enthusiast. So have a little think, and I will tell you the answer in a few minutes. So just to go back to the case of Dennehy, another interesting aspect, I think, is that probation search. She was already on probation. They were supposed to be monitoring her from after past offences. So she was convicted of a previous assault and owning a dangerous dog. So in doing research for this episode, I've come across some articles which kind of blame probation services, suggesting that there was like a missed opportunity. They could have stopped this killing spree. And I have to say, I think that's a bit unfair, actually. So probation services are a lot like forensic psychiatrists such as myself. So some of us work in the community and we follow up patients who have been inpatients previously. But much like probation services, we're quite limited in our powers. So for a start, there's usually a huge caseload. So probation services and psychiatrists have hundreds of patients they have to look after. Realistically, they probably only see them once every few weeks. And the other thing is that I think that her previous offences weren't actually that serious, you know, an assault, owning a dangerous dog. So I don't think that even, you know, somebody who's good at their job could have predicted that she was this dangerous. Because think about it, they've got thousands of people, some with more dangerous offences. So I would also say that in my experience as a forensic psychiatrist, sometimes it's obvious that a patient is gradually deteriorating. So you can like see the proverbial feces head towards the air conditioning system. But sometimes it's very sudden. They just relapse out of the blue and there's no warning signs. Anyway, back to the case of Dennehy. Whilst on remand, prison staff found an escape plot in her diary. I kid you not. So she actually wrote down that she was plotting to kill a prison guard and cut off his finger and like use it as one of those biometric scanners to escape from prison, which kind of suggests to me that maybe Dennehy was watching a few too many Jean-Claude Van Damme films when she was a kid. So my advice to you, dear viewers, is if you find yourself in that situation and you've got an escape plot, don't write it in your diary. So because of this, Dennehy was put in solitary confinement from September 2013 for 2 whole years while her court case was proceeding. And I think there was a battle which challenged her human rights, because it is an exceptionally long time. In prisons that I've worked in, people will be kept in solitary confinement if they're violent, usually for a few days, maybe a few weeks. 2 years is exceptional. So she must have been considered extremely high risk, and they must have taken her plot very seriously. So after the break, I'm going to tell you about the differences between female psychopaths and male psychopaths. But before I do that, let's see if you guessed the other 2 women in the UK who have whole life tariffs, so life sentences. Did you manage? Of course you did, you cheeky little sausages. So they are Myra Hindley and Rosemary West, who are 2 infamous female serial killers from England. If you're a true crime fan, you've probably heard of them. So Myra Hindley carried out the Moors murderers along with her partner Ian Brady, and together they killed 5 children between the ages of 10 and 17. And then Rose West was also a female serial killer, and she also collaborated with her husband, Fred West, and together they tortured and murdered at least 9 young women. So I think it's fair to say that Dennehy certainly kept some, how do I put it, exclusive company. So I'd like to formally welcome you to my channel, A Psych for Sore Minds. I'm your host, Dr. Sohom. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess and rehabilitate mentally disordered offenders, or what the tabloids might call the criminally insane. So I work in prisons, I work in courts, and I work in secure psychiatric units. And also I work as an expert witness, so I advise judges in criminal courts across the UK. And this channel right here that you're watching, A Psych for Sore Minds, dissects a whole range of mental health topics, and some of them are related to violence and offending, like this one obviously is, but some of them are just a bit more general for the average person. So for example, I answer some questions about mental illness on the internet. But my USP, I think, is that in some episodes I talk about my real life cases of people that I've actually assessed. And I ask you, which other YouTube channel has the balls to do that? If you find one, I'll be very surprised. So there are new episodes out on Tuesdays and Fridays. All I ask in return is that you pull your finger out of whichever orifice it is in and you subscribe, because there is something for everything on this channel. Okay, after the break, I'm going to, as promised, tell you about the difference between female and male psychopaths. So, as I said before, I've actually done an entire series on A Psych for Sore Minds about psychopaths, including my own real life cases, so you've got to go and check that out. Just to recap on a few things, 1% of the general population are psychopaths, and that proportion rises to about 20% in prison. And just to put psychopathy and antisocial personality disorder into perspective, because as I said, antisocial personality disorder has features and psychopathy is more than that. So 80% of people in prison have antisocial personality disorder, but only a quarter of them are psychopaths. And the rate of psychopathy in women is about 1/3 to 1/4 of that in men. So the differences are this: female psychopaths are typically less violent than males. So they don't generally tend to sadistically torture their victims, but instead they kill them in quite an effective and efficient manner, because for them, the violence is not for pleasure, it's like a means to the ends, a means to their ends. You know what I mean? Having said all that, I think Dennehy was an exception to this, because she seemed to actually stab these men for entertainment. She literally said that. She told the man, Gary Stretch, driving him around, as I said before, I want my fun, I need you to go get me my fun. So I think she was different from your average female psychopath. Other differences: women use verbal and relational kind of bullying and aggression, so they're more likely to harm people socially through like gossip, bullying them, ruining their reputations, and by ostracizing them. And also females are more likely to use like flirtation and sexualized behavior to get what they want. So Dennehy certainly sexually seduced some of her victims, including the man that she killed, who she took drinks and drugs with. And also female psychopaths are more likely to do things like feign suicide attempts or pretend to be the victim of assaults themselves to kind of manipulate the people, to manipulate sympathy, simply I think because it's easier for a female to fake being a victim of violence than it is for a male. So that's enough for me. Before I finish, I have some questions for you, dear viewer. Number one, do you know anybody that seemingly had a normal childhood but grew up to be quite disturbed? And number two, do either you or personally, or do you know of people that had parents that were not quite abusive, but there was just something not particularly nice about them either? If you know, please tell me in the comments. So I'm going to tell you about what's coming up on the next episode of Psych for Sore Minds. But before I do that, I'm excited to share some news with you guys, which is that I'm going to be a speaker at CrimeCon UK. So in my previous videos, I said it was going to be in June, but unfortunately because of COVID, it's been delayed until September. It is, as you might know, a massive convention. It's really popular in the States. It's coming over to the UK for the first time. You will hear about serial killers, unsolved crimes from criminologists, law enforcement agents, your favourite podcasters. I'm going to be doing a talk about 2 real-life cases that I've assessed of defendants who've killed their own family members. One had a mental illness and one did not. If you want to know more about that talk, I think there's another video on my channel that goes into it in a bit more detail. So if you're a true crime enthusiast, you cannot miss out on CrimeCon UK. Follow the link to get the tickets, and you can use the code PSYCH to get a 10% discount, because I got you. So coming up on a Psych for Sore Minds in the near future, look out for my 2-part series about hearing voices. I'm going to be telling you about which psychiatric diagnoses are related to hearing voices. I'm going to answer the question, does everybody who hears voices necessarily need to be mentally ill? And my USP, I'm going to tell you about some real life cases of people that I've assessed who've heard voices, some of whom have gone on to commit serious violence. Before you go, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Not only does it help me out immeasurably, but it actually makes wasps in your near vicinity more docile. I'd love it if you commented on my channel, asked me some questions. I'm happy to answer them. I've been doing this a bit recently. Follow us on Instagram, like our Facebook page, and if you have any ideas for an episode or any questions, then please email them to psychforsoreminds@gmail.com. And if you're going to reference us on social media, then please use the hashtag PsychSore. Lastly, tell your favourite people about Psych for Sore Minds, please, because they deserve it. Spread the love. Until next time, stay euthymic, and remember, I love you. Now go away.